Hi. Um, another day, another birthday bash day. Um, Today I'm going to introduce you to a work in progress that I'm working on with Kenzie Kade. Last year I had this thing where I really, really wanted to read some motorcycle club books that weren't contemporary. And I pitched something to Less Than Three, which you'll hear that when I talk about Death Mask. But also, I had another idea for a motorcycle club book that was set in an urban fantasy setting. And Kenzie likes to read motorcycle books as much as, well, more. She reads them more than I do. And I invited her to write this series with me. And it's called Devil's Dawn, which is the name of the motorcycle club. And the first book in this series is called Devil's Heart. Um, we plan for there to be 6 books in this series, maybe with an offshoot with another motorcycle club because of how this world is set up. Um, to give you a little bit of background in the world, this is set in the future. When I pitched the series to Megan, I said, "Hey," well, it goes something like this. It's not exactly word for word, but it's, I'm like, "Hey, Kenzie and I are writing a series, and it's about a motorcycle club. It's urban fantasy, futuristic, cyberpunk, dystopia." and it was a crazy list of things that we added into this to give it a little bit something more, something different, something that hasn't been seen. So um, the love interest in Devil's Heart is Ina, who is a half fae, and the club member, his name is Cookie, and he is a rock goblin. So this big ass bulky guy, and a little half fae. So we had a lot of fun with this, and it's almost finished. We're in the process of self editing right now before we submit it. So um, the background to the world is basically uh, construction broke open the fairy mounds and released the Tuatha De do. I know I'm going to say this wrong. Tuatha De Danann. Is that right? So um, the Fae come out and decide they're going to take over the world. They want to reduce the urban areas, and they infiltrate the humans. The humans find out, and the humans are like, "Well, let us help you." And the Fae are like, "No, die, die, die." Not like that, but basically they like, "We don't want you here. Humans can go away, please." And we have to kill you to do it. We will. So there's this really long war between the humans and the Fae. And what happens at the end of the war is that the Fae take over the rural areas, and all the humans flee to the urban areas. And the first 5 years are really hard because the urban areas aren't set up to feed, house, um, or take care of so many humans. And so there's a lot of disease and death within the first 5 years of the war. Um, but the urban areas become blockaded. They use, of course, metal and steel and iron to keep the Fae out of the urban areas, and they transform the areas. And so you have a mixture of high tech and low tech, almost steampunk in some areas, where other areas where they could afford it have like computers and handhelds and stuff like that. And people who can't afford it are, walking places, or using horse and buggies to get around. So the landscape has changed quite a bit because they had to change the urban areas to fit their needs. And so it's a little different view of a future that isn't as bright as you can say, as you would think of a futuristic landscape. That's why it's a little bit of a dystopia, because there is some bleakness to it. Um, the part I'm reading is from Kenzie's part. Um, this is in the prologue with Ina, so it's introducing Ina and what is happening to him at the very beginning of the story. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope I read this right. Ina tried not to gawk as he stared out at the dark city as the carriage bounced along the old rutted blacktop. The scent of horse, wood, and sweat filled the cabin's interior, but a part of him didn't mind. For the moment at least, he was away from his foster families, the Dallas. Only the light of the full moon guided Ina and his guard, a man of over 6 feet with broad chest, made more intimidating by the vest he wore over his bare skin. A braid the color of burnt mahogany fell over his shoulder and rested against his waist. Pale beads interspersed the dark plate, and Ina had the impression they were bone. Distractedly, he wondered if they were the bones of his escort's enemies. Then the man's eyes, dark as pitch, cut to his, and Ina shivered. Suddenly knowing wasn't important, nor was becoming one of Big Bad's foes. Shells of the old buildings and crumbling family homes passed by, and Ina turned his thoughts to what New Chicago had been before the war. Had humans attended meetings in the massive structures, used them as nightclubs or restaurants? He wondered if the places had ever seen true joy or felt heartbreaking sadness. Up to this point in his life, Ina had not experienced either. He closed his eyes in an attempt to picture the old pre-war map he pilfered from the trash and hid from his foster family. He wasn't allowed many conveniences or hobbies, but he was given a dictionary and other remedial books. This was how he taught himself to read. The only reason he'd been allowed the indulgence was because Mr. Dalla's library was expansive and his days were boring. The map had been a treasured find. So far, Ina's life had been one of monotony, 15 years of it. The High Court of the Golden Court and his mother had cast him out, forcing him to live with the Dalla family, all because he'd been born a halfling, as if he was to blame. Before he'd been sent away, what he remembered of his mother hadn't been motherly. She was a noble fae of the Tuatha De Danann, and they weren't known for their kindness. The carriage rounded a rough corner, jostling Ina from being lost in his own mind. Hard black eyes met his from across the cab. Big Bad hadn't said anything to him since they left the Dallas on the outskirts of downtown New Chicago. Mrs. Dalla had been all too happy to rid herself of the cursed halfling, as she was fond of calling him. Even happier to accept the package his escort had handed over. Ina had no clue what it held, but in the end he didn't care. The Dallas could rot in their own refuge as long as, or if he had anything to say. Had he ever been gifted a smile or called anything other than halfling? Halfling, half fae, half human. Ina couldn't even despise his heritage as much as he wanted to at times. He had no say in his birthright. He was who he was. Though his views of humans and fays had been tainted by his mother and then his foster family, he remembered little of his matriarch other than what he'd been told. From what he gathered, her selfishness knew no bounds, as was further evidenced by her tossing Ina aside. As for the paternal genes once, he heard Mr. and Mrs. Dallas say his human father was an assassin in the employ of the Golden Court, going by the code name Huntsman. With a name and a reputation like that, Ina wasn't exactly digging around to find him. "Where are we going?" Ina asked, not for the first time. As was par for the course, Ina's companion remained silent, though his narrowed gaze projected annoyance before he turned to watch the mind-numbing view of the city drift by. The opulent furnishings of the carriage, the plush leather benches, rich red and gold of the interior and gleaming wood accents, didn't seem to fit Big Bag's gruff, earthy facade. Such lavishness wasn't Ina's forte either, so what did he know? Ina sighed and leaned his head against the cool glass of the window once more. From this path he could just about see the large body of water bordering New Chicago. The towering waterside energy plants stood out like an eyesore. He knew they were necessary, converting plastic to fuel for the main purpose of running the underground pumps that kept the city from flooding. By the time he turned 15 4 months ago, Ina had read every book in the Dallas Modest Library and knew all about the post-war transformation of New Chicago and the need of new power sources. He'd even read about the highly profitable process of searching for the plastic at the dumps, despite the threat of hidden methane pockets making the job deadly. The horses had another turn, and Ina threw out his hands to steady himself as the carriage skittered over uneven road. He didn't bother looking at Big Bad for assistance. He had a feeling the guy would let him tumble to the ground and still not offer a hand up. Outside the window, Ina caught sight of one of the city's ecological compromises. From what he could tell, an urban garden ran the length of at least 3 blocks. Inner-city gardens like this one had become the source of oxygen-producing plants, vegetables, and fruits after the war, although trees were difficult to grow in New Chicago because of the shallow soil of urban grounds. Armed guards and barbed wire fences blocked side roads, keeping unwelcome entities out of the territories, otherwise lined with massive structures. Some buildings disintegrated while others were used as housing, but every structure in New Chicago served a purpose. Communities like these had long ago demolished entire city blocks, turning the areas into life-sustaining gardens or using larger structures as greenhouses. Ina's earthy magic soared to the surface upon sensing the hidden greenery, reaching out to touch ethereal fingers across the leafy greens of nearby cornstalks. The tension in his muscles uncoiled at the brief connection, like a desperately needed breath of fresh air into his nervous system. Pretty, huh? The rumble was so soft, at first Ina thought he imagined it, then he found his companion staring out the same window. All he could do was nod, unsure a verbal answer would be possible in the face of this sudden shock. It's not as nice as the fairgrounds, but here in the middle of the city, it'll do, Big Bad continued. The coldness hadn't diminished in his escort's eyes, but they held a hint of familiarity almost. Ina had never sensed the likeness before then, and he wasn't sure he liked the feeling. It is, Ina squawked, nerves causing his voice to break, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The man glanced away, and for the rest of the journey the silence thickened to the point Ina felt as if the space separating them was another presence entirely. After a while, the towering buildings and the vast cityscape gave way to smaller structures that looked to be homes. Many were well kept, large, and luxurious. When the carriage slowed, rounding onto a cobbled drive, they rolled through a heavy, barred security gate, guarded by 2 massive men with muscles on top of muscles. Ina was surprised to see lawn of such thick grass, but that he could also discern the richness of the green color in the dead of night. He pressed closer to the window to get a better view of where they were going and maybe clue into what they were doing there. At the end of the wide path, a lavish 3-story red brick manor perched on top of a low hill, as if it were the crowning glory of the whole neighborhood. Inside, lights blazed bright, shining through every window, what Ina could see. Along the front of the structure he counted 8 sconces, 2 on either side of the front entry and 6 others stationed firmly between each set of windows. The carriage came to a stop at the foot of the white granite staircase leading to the main entryway. On either side of the landing 2 white fearsome gargoyles, horned demons with the bodies of lions, wings of bats, and over large talons of eagles, sat atop each banister. "Where are we?" Ina asked, trying to ignore the sudden fear clogging his throat. As sequestered as his life had been up to this point, even he knew nothing good came from being in dandy territory. Was he leaving one evil for another? He suspected so, though if it were the case he'd rather return home to the Dallas, better to know one's enemy. "Home," Big Bad answered in a flat tone before jerking forward and unlatching the door. "Don't move." After his escort slipped out of the carriage, Ina watched as he made his way up the steps with the grace of a predator. Ina hadn't noticed the other person standing near the door until Big Bad stepped up to him. The new man held himself with more poise and elegance, his slender frame nearly hidden from view by his escort's bulk. With the distance between them, Ina couldn't hear what they said, but he watched as long wavy red hair bounced up and down with each enthusiastic bob of the stranger's head. Then Big Bad turned and walked back to Ina. "Get out," he commanded, sticking his head through the opening of the door, meeting Ina's gaze. "Now." Ina jumped at the growl, then blinked back the burn behind his eyes. He had no idea why he felt like crying, or why he felt such disappointment in Big Bad's grasp as Big Bad grasped his bicep, guiding Ina up the staircase. The man's hair shone like firelight beneath the warm glow of the outside lamps. Seeing so clearly at night was a novelty for Ina, one that made him uncomfortable. The man's green gaze raked Ina from head to toe as if judging him and finding him wanting. A shiver of disgust slithered up Ina's spine. "Mikolos," Big Bad growled. "This is the halfling, the man," Mikolos finished. Ina did his best not to recoil at the hated epithet. "Welcome, pet." "I'm not your pet," Ina ground out. He was nobody's pet. His escort's hand squeezed like a vice around Ina's upper arm. "Respect, boy." Ina snorted. He had no reason to respect either man at the moment. "Fire," Mikolos mused. "I like that in a pet. Even more, I like to watch it fizzle out. Don't worry, pet. I'll be sure to train the insolence out of you." "I'm not interested in your sick games," Big Bad growled, shoving Ina closer to Mikolos, who snagged him behind the neck and pulled him close. Ina's nose skinned the unbelievably soft fabric of Mikolos' waistcoat. Soap, spice, and musk filled Ina's senses, too pretentious to be the cheap version of cologne Mr. Dalla wore when he used to take his wife out on the town. "The halfling is yours for as long as you please the Tuatha De Danann. Don't fuck it up." "You worry about your business, and I'll worry about mine," Mikolos sneered. The steel in his voice caused Ina to look up at him. A furious glint hit his eyes, and Ina trembled, though he told himself to show no fear. "If that is all," Mikolos continued arrogantly, dismissing Big Bad, "I have a slave to train. Please do send my gratitude to the Seelie. The halfling is a gift beyond expectation." Big Bad grunted before spinning and making his way to the carriage. With a hand still squeezing his neck, bordering on pain, Mikolos directed Ina to the doorway. His heart pounded unevenly with dread, and the rush of blood speeding through his veins echoed in his ears. Before they reached the entrance, Mikolos pulled him to a halt. "Oh, huntsman!" His call echoed in the empty courtyard. Ina's muscles bunched as he snapped around to see Big Bad had paused at the open door of the carriage, one foot already resting on the floorboard. Ina's breath caught in his chest, confusion muddling his thoughts. "Huntsman?" "What?" Big Bad, codename Huntsman growled. "Nothing," Mikolos sing-songed with a hint of laughter and deception in his voice. "Only, thank you for the delivery." It was very generous of you." The narrowed-eyed, glowered huntsman sent back spoke of his irritation. Frozen in shock, Ina could only watch as his father made the unintelligible noise, then folded himself into the cab. The driver had the carriage in motion before Ina found his voice. Excuse me. Behind him, Mikolos chuckled a dark melody. "Wave bye-bye to Papa," he taunted. Ina whipped around to face him. The slimy smirk Mikolos leveled at him held a host of promises, none of them good. "Come, pet." He dropped his hold on Ina and marched to the foyer, turning the first corner and leaving Ina's side. He obviously expected Ina to follow. "Your training begins now." He glanced back. By the lighted drive of the estate he watched the carriage roll through the gate and onto the road, then finally out of sight. He could run, but he had no idea where he'd go. The property was surrounded and protected by armed guards. A man who could afford to post men at his front gate was bound to have more in his employ. "Now, halfling," Nicholas snapped from somewhere inside, "your resistance will not be tolerated." Ina's insides cramped as he took a hesitant step over the threshold. He would have to bide his time. Eventually an escape would come, and he would find a way out, and when he did, he vowed that he would never allow another asshole to take control of his life again. There's Devil's Heart. Thank you for stopping by today, and don't forget to do the giveaway. So you guys have a great day. We'll talk to you later.